Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm Vivian Fonseca from Tulane, and on behalf of the Professional Development Corps of LA CaTS, I would like to welcome you to this program. It's actually, as you know, part of our annual retreat, which had to be canceled in person for reasons that you know very well. We were going to have a full day program today at University Medical Center, but that is not happening. But we're very pleased to be using the technology that we're all learning very fast to bring this program in virtual fashion to everybody across the state of Louisiana. And we are continuing with our planned keynote address this afternoon, which will be delivered by Paige Jarreau, who is the Science Communication Specialist for the College of Science at Louisiana State University in Baton Rouge. She has done a lot of very important work in this area, published in the area. She has very interesting titles to some of her publications. One of them in PLOS One a few months ago was entitled Using Selfies to Challenge Public Stereotypes of Scientists. So I'm really fascinated by that title. She also has one in Science in 2018 on social media for social change in science. So these are very important topics that touch or beginning to touch in what we do every day in clinical research. And hopefully we will use these more and more effectively. That's the important thing, to use it correctly and effectively while doing clinical research. So Paige, welcome to LA CaTS, and we look forward to your lecture.
Thank you. I'm assuming you can hear me and you can see the slides.
Yes, very clearly, very well.
Awesome. I might go ahead and present, but let me know if there's any issues with seeing that now. Awesome. So I think we'll have plenty of time for questions after this too. So like if you're, as we're going through, think about questions that you might want to ask. I think we're going to be doing some Q&A. But thank you for the introduction. I'm actually right now employed full-time by Lifeology. It's a health software company. And there I do science communication. And I'm the co-founder of Lifeology. It's a platform that brings scientists and artists together. I still have an affiliation with LSU. I do consulting work for them in science communication. So today we're talking about social media, and I do have slides, but want to make sure we have time for discussion. And social media really helps us tell stories in different ways than we perhaps could have before. So storytelling is also has always been very important in science. Even research papers that you write for science publications tell stories. They tell very specific ones, but they tell stories. But social media allows us to tell really personal stories and show people kind of inside the lives of us as scientists. They allow us to be very in the moment with our communications, which we'll see a little bit later is why thinking about how you use social media, it's important to think about like how can you leverage that real-time communications as opposed to previous forms of communication that aren't so real-time or that are more broadcast. And we can even collaborate with others in telling these stories. So social media is a user-generated content platform, so you can put things out there and then people can contribute. They can contribute in telling those stories even with you. So as scientists and science communicators, why should we care about social media? So many of you probably, if you're attending this talk, you care about social media, you think you're interested in using it. But I'll just go through a little bit of like why you might want to do that. And one is just that social media is the way that we communicate today. So not just about science, about anything and everything. You're seeing that in the midst of this pandemic that, we're turning to social media a lot of times to get our news, to connect with friends and family, to do everyday communications. And so it would be a really big miss if science weren't there as well in social media. So I scientists, we're human and we take part in society, so it makes sense that we would have ourselves and our work in social media where people are going to get their information and where they're sharing their social experiences. So this is, a little bit old now, so you can assume that it's gone even up from there. But, most Americans are internet users, and of those, a majority are getting their news from social media. So that means a lot of stuff, what they're going to see from news or even science and health information is going to be filtered through social networks. So again, I think that's why it's important for scientists who want to be available in those networks as well. So you can use social media, whether you're a student, a faculty member, doing research, or a teacher. You can use social media in many, many different ways. It's not always to reach public audiences. In fact, I would say most of us as scientists, when we're using social media, are reaching other people like ourselves. That's one thing that social media is really good at. And so that means reaching other scientists and other science communicators. So there's a lot you can do in social media that is communications to advance yourself in your own scientific community. You actually have to try a little bit harder to reach people that aren't scientists, but it's a great place to start to reach other scientists and to network. So you can use social media to do things like networking and finding collaborators. This has been really important for me as a science communicator in Louisiana when I was doing research, and still am, in science communication at LSU. I didn't have a science communication program at LSU. There weren't necessarily a whole lot of other researchers who studied social media and science. So it's really nice for me to use social media to reach collaborators. I've written many papers with people I've never met in real life that I only met through social media. So I very much have relied on social media to do my science and research. You can also establish a voice for yourself. This is really nice if you start a Twitter handle or a blog and you use it long term. You can start to establish something that you have credibility for. And so for example, me blogging over time for many years about social media and scientists means that I'm turned to as sort of a voice of expertise on that. So even today, a reporter reached out to me wanting to interview me about an article she's running about social media influencers, and misinformation on the coronavirus. And she reached out to me, through my blog, because I'm someone who has established a voice, sort of a brand as being an expert on social media. Same thing of how I was able to talk to you today. So having a brand and having something out there that's established can help you in your career. You can recruit students or find labs to work with, conversely, by using social media. So you might, especially scientists who are working in the lab, need to recruit students. Having a lab blog or a lab Twitter or Facebook is a great way to have prospective students see what you're doing and decide if they want to come visit. You can increase visibility of your research, and we'll show that in another slide of how that actually happens. You can conduct digitally enhanced research as well. So I did this during my PhD. I think there's some interest in this group about recruiting research participants through social media. So I conducted my PhD looking at how people perceive scientists on social media and how scientists use social media. And I recruited many participants through my own networks. That worked because I was doing research studies where my own personal networks could help me reach my research participants. Obviously, that's not always the case, but if you think ahead and you're doing research on a particular thing, maybe investing in some social media kind of time to find that audience online will help you recruit participants that you need for your studies. You can be a source of accurate information for journalists. Just like I said, someone reached out to me today that I was able to be a source because I'm available online and they could find me. If I didn't have a blog and I didn't have my email address readily available, I would never have known that journalist was looking for a source that I could answer questions for. And one of my favorite things is crowdsourcing information on social media. So if you follow my Twitter from the lab bench, you'll see that one of my favorite things to do is like ask for feedback. Like I put questions out on social media, and I love to sort of crowdsource information. So even before I talked to the reporter today, I posted out to my network, hey, anyone who's studying misinformation and how it spreads online, please ping me and I can use that when I'm talking to this reporter. So I was able to, like, even in 20 minutes, because I've developed this network, crowdsource some a lot of people sent me great information that I used in the interview. So it's almost like you have, Google Scholar at your fingertips, except for there's people, you don't even have to do the searching. Some people are sending you the information. It's almost like you have a giant coffee shop of other, really smart people. If you grow that network, and you can turn to them for information. Of course, you have to give back to the community in order to expect to receive that. And then you can also use social media to open up the scientific process. And this goes into applying for grants for NSF, for example, that they require broader impacts. How are you reaching and even engaging the broader public in your research? And one way you could do that is using social media to talk about your research in progress. So sharing methods, sharing even development of research questions, and involving the public in sort of the behind the scenes of science before it's even published. That doesn't mean necessarily sharing results, obviously, because you don't necessarily want to share your results before they're published, but you can share kind of how you're approaching your research questions, for example. And this is just this is a little diagram with a DOI of a paper that looks at basically that scientific articles that are highly tweeted are also more highly cited. So it's just sort of a diagram of like what happens in terms of like why when we tweet things, why would we get more research impact? Well, it's because that social media buzz, especially in a community of scientists online, can help them see your paper, pay attention to it, read it, and therefore be able to cite it more often. So if you want to use social media for science communication, let's say you're sold on doing that, like what sort of things should you consider? And some things I love to tell people to remember is that social media is social first. This is really important because it's remembering that social media is not just another broadcast channel. So if you just use it as sort of like a microphone, a megaphone to talk to people out there in the world, but you never listen back or use it as a more interactive tool, you're really missing out on the power of social media. You can use it as a broadcast tool, but it actually has like diminishing returns in terms of how useful it is if you only use it to broadcast. So if you have a Twitter and you start to use it to only, for example, share when you've published a new blog post or when you've published a new paper, if that's all you do on your Twitter handle, you'll probably get very little engagement. You'll probably get very few followers and not see a whole lot of return on that time of putting out content. Because if you only self-promote on social media, people usually tend to see past that and they're not getting a lot of value, so they might sort of stop following you on a regular basis. And then you're not able to share things when you have things to share. So it's best to use social media as a social thing. So just as you would participate in a journal club or some other thing with colleagues, they're going to want to see you engage on a regular basis, to participate, to give back, to contribute as much as you take away. And social media is the same way. So you want to follow people that you want to follow you back. You want to interact with them, respond, engage in live chats. That kind of thing can be really powerful for growing your following. And social media isn't a replacement for really useful, interesting, and compelling content. So it means that you can't just, and it's also hard, don't just want to, reshare, let's say a journal article, and you want to share it out on social media. You can, of course, just share the link. But what would be probably more share-worthy, what people are going to engage with more, is if you take some time to pull some pictures out of that journal article, to summarize it in lay language, to do some other things where you can compose a tweet or a Facebook post or a blog post that you would be repurposing and rewriting the content for the purpose of the social media channel. And that's going to get a lot more attention and interest than just a link to somewhere where people need to go and read something very complicated. Before you use social media, these really should go first, is that you should know what your goals are. You can just jump into social media, but it's going to be very difficult to wade through if you don't know what you're really trying to do. And you should know who your audience is or who you want it to be, because that's going to depend on what social networks you choose to share and use, and also what you share. And knowing your audience is really critical to deciding how to do this strategically. So one lesson is to let your goals influence where and how you communicate about your science on social media. So for example, let's say, you think about your goal and you think about your audience, and that can help you decide what you're going to do. So maybe you use social media or multimedia outreach, so creating really beautiful pictures of your science, and you use those in your public talks to make a broader impact. Maybe you give science talks out in public, and then you can write those into your grants, and that is a really good broader impact activity. You can also have visuals, videos, and other things that gather attention in order to tell a story about your science, to leverage crowdfunding, for example. Or let's say you want your audience you have a citizen science project where you need people to participate. You're going to have to tell the story of you're going to have to make it interesting for people to want to participate. It's communicating in their language, using visuals, giving public talks. Those are kind of things that can help people see why they might be interested in engaging in your research and your science. A quick aside is that there are many modes of science communication. And so this is a little bit of theory behind the science of science communication, but it's really good to understand, especially when it comes to what your goals are. So a classic mode of science communication is called the deficit model. And it basically just assumes that people don't, if only they knew more, they would love science. And that basically there's a gap in public understanding of science. And what the implications of that are is that people would engage more if they just knew about it. There are times to use the deficit model comes into play. For example, in a classroom, you basically have knowledge that you need to the students just need to learn. But most of the time in public, the deficit model fails miserably in terms of getting people to engage or enjoy science. So thinking about just giving a lecture or giving people information and facts usually doesn't work in terms of engaging them in science. So there's newer models of science communication based on dialogue and participation. So dialogue is having this back and forth, conversations with people, maybe even getting non-scientist input on research, and participation is even further of actually having people engage in science, maybe collecting data with you, informing research questions, having chats before a research project is launched, engaging citizens in the scientific process. And I think this is where the power of social media comes in. That if you're just trying to fill public gaps in knowledge, maybe a public talk or a lecture, even what I'm doing right now is fine. But if you really want to engage people beyond that, it's going to take some more dialogue-based, participatory-based science communication. So maybe that's like a science fair where people, engage in little experiments and games. Maybe it's chats online where non-scientists can engage. So I think social media can help us in some of those real-time, kind of more participatory communication modes. So an example of a more participatory mode might be using Snapchat and Instagram to share the visuals behind your science, maybe what it's like to be you as a researcher on a day-to-day, sharing pictures from the field, sharing your experiences, and then being open to people, having people ask you questions and being available to answer their questions about what it's like to be a scientist. Especially for young people, that might help them decide to go into a career in science. And so this could be something that you have as a more participatory form of science communication. You can also do things like more visual types of communication. For example, let's say you want to reach broad audiences, truly broad audiences, people with low science literacy, kids, people that have maybe even no interest in science. You're going to have another hook there to get them interested. And maybe even not lead with science, maybe leading with art, maybe leading with entertainment. And so a lot of scientists, we can do this, but it's not necessarily easy for us to do. We haven't been trained in this. And so it's really nice to collaborate with someone, to collaborate with an artist, to collaborate with, someone in Hollywood, to collaborate with educators and entertainers, science comedians. You can engage with people who are creators who can help you reach these lay audiences. This is something we're trying to do at Lifeology, this platform I made. I helped to bring together scientists and artists, and so that scientists can their work can go further because they're working with creatives who know how to tell stories and reach lay audiences. So this is an example of Lifeology Courses. Is basically we're trying to create really bite-sized, very visual, little interactive courses for people that brings together science and arts, but leads with art to help people understand science better, and to make it really fun and not feel like it's a burden to try to work through this complicated science that they're supposed to learn. Infographics are another great way to share complicated information in a way that people can grasp more easily. It also helps them, when people can grasp science more easily, it also means that they can engage. So if you ask, if you want people to engage in citizen science or you want participation, but the first thing you lead with is very complicated science, they're going to kind of shut down. They don't really know how to participate at that point because they don't understand. So it's really important that you make participation, you make it available because people can understand and they can enjoy and they can get, they can see how they can fit in. And so infographics are another way that you could share your science or even share calls for participation in science. And it's great to work with an artist to do these things because it can take a lot of time and training on your part to figure out how to create an infographic, or you can work with a creator who can make something really beautiful and empathetic really quickly. So one thing I would encourage everyone to do is just to practice. There's no getting around just practicing how to do this. And so I'll take you a little bit through how I use different social networks, but by practicing, you can better get a grasp on what you should be sharing where. So if you want to use social media, but you have no idea, should I be sharing on Twitter? Should I be sharing on Facebook? Like, what should I best use? One thing to note is I'm going to talk about tons of social networks, as in like I'm using all of these, but I'm not your typical person as far as the social media use. I do this for a job, so I have to be on most of the social networks that are the major social networks that are out there. If you are starting from a place where you don't really do any science communication on any social networks, I would not encourage you to try to do them all at once. Just pick one or maybe two that you're going to focus on to grow and to share content to. But just to give you a guide, so Twitter, I use Twitter to chat with other science communicators, other professionals. I like to ask timely questions there and get feedback, but it's often my little bubble of other scientists and science communicators. I like to ask people to share. If I have something really important that I need to share, like a blog post or a paper, I'll post it on Twitter and ask my colleagues to share it if they're interested. I like to ask people about their thoughts and experiences too, but understanding that this is very short-lived. So for Twitter, I expect one of my tweets to only live for about 15 minutes. And after that, people mostly aren't going to see it. So if I do have a paper that I'm sharing, I'm not just going to send one tweet. I'm probably going to send a tweet for a few days or even a few weeks, like every day, finding different ways to talk about it, pulling information out of the paper and kind of summarizing it, but doing different things to keep sharing that because it's going to kind of fall out of the timeline within about 15 minutes. On Instagram, I use Instagram very differently. I use this to reach broader communities. I personally have kind of a circus aerial Instagram that reaches way more people than my science Twitter does. But that's where I share things about my personal life, and I also engage with people that aren't scientists. But that allows me, sometimes I have science I want to share. For example, we put out some primers about the coronavirus, and then I shared those through my circus Instagram, and it actually reached a lot more people who weren't scientists. So I don't often or regularly share science through those channels, but because I have them, I can when I want to reach lay audiences. I also use Instagram for work to reach other communities like health enthusiasts for Lifeology, for our health tracking apps, or a community of artists that I reach on our Lifeology Instagram. So I post visual content, maybe science explainers, maybe kind of fun things behind the scenes of what we're working on, personal stories. But this is a place where, with the use of hashtags especially, you can reach people who might not be scientists, or you can reach particular communities of broader people by engaging in those networks. LinkedIn is just a great tool for posting kind of articles and updates, again, to your professional community. So you're looking for a job, you have papers to share, your professional community of people who know you on LinkedIn are going to engage with that, maybe congratulate you, probably share it. And so it's a great way to maybe talk to collaborators, but probably not, general public audiences. Facebook, again, is like kind of, it's a very broad network, and it depends on how you're using it. Most people are using Facebook just to talk with friends and family, but there are pages and groups that can be really useful to, you could create a lab page, lab Facebook page for your science group, and share updates there, have students participate, and that's going to reach friends and family, and then also potentially others who start engaging with that page. And you can also, it's a great place to start groups for discussion. So starting a group of other, health communicators, or a group of other people interested in this particular cool new research thing. This can be great for discussions. And it's a nice place because most people are going to have a Facebook, even if they don't use it often. So it's a really great accessible network for people to engage with, as opposed to if you share something on Twitter and then you try to tell, a family member or a friend to go check out my Twitter to see what I'm doing, they might not even have Twitter. And so there's already a barrier to them seeing it because they're like, well, how do I even get on Twitter to see your update? But Facebook, you can at least direct people to your Facebook page, and they're probably going to have a Facebook enabled to log in and engage with it. And then I use blogging anytime I have something that's really important that I need to be long-lived. So I talk about Twitter being, 15 minutes. If I want to create, if I want to create a summary of a research paper that's come out and I want that to live for a long time and to be something I refer back to, I'm going to blog about it. So blogging doesn't necessarily mean it reaches a greater audience, but it's something that can be indexed through Google searches. And it's something that can be longer lived that you can refer people back to. So a little bit of a change of gears. I just want to address social media in this time. So it's just some tips on, what we're facing right now in terms of social media in the time of this pandemic. And these are things that we should always think about, but I think are incredibly important right now. Is if you start using social media right now, the one tip I would suggest is that you really be careful what you're sharing. This becomes especially important if you start to gain a big following on social media, you can have a big impact. If you tweet something, if you have a lot of followers, it can get retweeted a lot of times. And so you start to have to become a more and more responsible steward of information. So fact checking before you share. A little while ago, I basically vowed to never retweet or share anything that I hadn't read. It doesn't matter if it's a blog post or a research paper. I'm going to go and read at least the abstract, consume the information before I share it so that I know that I'm not sharing something that could offend someone or that isn't accurate. So really think about what you're sharing and maybe fact checking that before you do it. And also think about what you can add. This is always important, but especially right now, if you are going to engage in conversations around science discourse, for example, around the coronavirus right now, think about what you can add of true added value. So do you have expertise on this that is not being shared or that could really help people? Then it might be worth sharing. But if it's just kind of contributing to noise, as in you don't really necessarily have anything specific expertise to share, but you just want to chime in, that might not be useful to you and might not be useful to others. So really pull on your own scientific expertise of what you can add of true value. And I think you'll get more out of social media by doing that anyway. Find collaborators to work more quickly, so we can work a lot better together than we can independently by ourselves. So if you're thinking about starting a new science communication project, it's probably, you could probably move a lot faster if you try to reach out who else might be doing this or thinking about doing this. Can you find an artist to work with you? Can you find another science communicator or someone who writes really well to help you? And so finding collaborators can help you start a new science communication project a lot faster, and it'll probably be better in the end than you trying to do it all by yourself. And then finally, right now, it's a great time to just figure out what digital skills you think you need for the future. And so thinking about, do you want to try some social media training? Do you want to learn how to edit photos and videos and use Adobe Creative Cloud Suite? Is now a time that you could build up your ability to build websites, even simple ones. Figuring out what digital skills could help you in the future. It's a great time to be thinking about that now, because something could happen where all of a sudden you need those digital skills in order to keep work, functioning in the world. So it's great to kind of choose one to catch up on. Now we'll just go into some tips for using social media, and then we'll open it up for discussion. So if you want to use social media for science communication, these are my tips pretty broadly. But the first one is just to be true to yourself. And so that means not trying to create a persona on social media, but to really be transparent and share your own values, your passions, what you like, what you dislike. Some scientists are a little bit worried about doing this because they don't want to kind of contaminate their science with their personal beliefs and values. That there might be something to that when it comes to politics. So some scientists have found that once they start sharing the sort of their ideas of the political implications of their work, sometimes that can interfere with people's interfere with their credibility a little bit. But most of the time, I think sharing your own beliefs and values and kind of differentiating that from your science, I think is very helpful, and it's actually a sign that you're a human and can be a sign of credibility for others of you. That you're not kind of selling yourself as perfectly objective, because nobody is, of sharing a little bit more about yourself as a scientist as well. So really try to be true to yourself, and not trying to create a persona that could be not truly authentic. Also, know your audience. So that means either knowing who you're communicating to right now or who you want to communicate to, because that can, again, do you need to define what DNA is or do you not? That depends on who the audience is. Do you need to kind of frame the information that you're trying to share in the form of a story, a personal patient story, or not? That's going to depend on who you're communicating with. So knowing your audience is going to really, really help you figure out all the other aspects of your science communication. And then also just remember that who you think your audience is or who you want them to be is not the limit of who you're going to reach. In other words, if you decide, well, I'm just communicating to other scientists on my Twitter, so I can say this thing that kind of only other scientists would understand, that maybe is, I don't know, maybe even demeaning to people with low science education levels. The problem is that when you put that out on Twitter, Twitter is public, and it's going to reach other people that aren't your intended audience. So you could really quickly offend someone, create misinformation because you're not thinking about the fact that you could reach people who aren't your intended audience. So always remember that just because you have a certain audience you're thinking of, that doesn't mean it's the limit of who you're going to reach. Think about humanizing the scientists, and this comes to some research I've done of some issues around credibility of scientists. People trust scientists in that people think scientists are very smart, and they think they're very, that they can do things like research and like math, but they don't necessarily know what to think of scientists when it comes to warmth, which means, does this person share my values? Would this person kind of have my back? Would this person be someone I turn to for personal advice? That sometimes people don't know what to think about scientists. So there's this really awesome paper in PNAS talking about warmth versus competence of scientists, and basically showing that compared to, let's say, a teacher or a nurse is considered very warm and you might turn to for advice and kind of really think as trustworthy. Scientists, you see them as very competent and smart, but you don't really know, they might be kind of cold to you. It's kind of this outsider that you're not sure how to relate to. And so by humanizing yourself as a scientist, by sharing those other values and hobbies that you have, by talking about why you got into science in the first place, sharing, personal stories, that kind of stuff can make you more warm and help people overall relate better to scientists and therefore trust them more. Try to, when you're sharing to social media, if you're trying to reach a public audience, remember what got you interested in science in the first place. And it wasn't probably, equations and really, really niche topics, but it was like the wow factor of getting to see cool, colors and test tubes, of being able to ask questions or run experiments. Find kind of the wow factor in your science, and remember to communicate that stuff, even if it becomes day to day for you and maybe even boring. It's going to be something that other people don't see very often. Being visible and visual goes back to social media content that's visual is very often more share worthy. But also be visible in terms of like sharing yourself, even being on social media in the first place, visible to journalists, to lay audiences, and sharing a little bit more about yourself in visual ways can help people relate to you, can help them feel like they can actually participate, can make them feel like they could reach out to you and ask you questions. So being kind of approachable by being visible is a great way great way to engage people in science if you want to engage lay audiences. And then also always thinking about how can you make your science visual. Visuals being oftentimes the universal language that can help people that aren't scientists still understand what, basic principles of science or what's going on. So that's one of the things, we're trying to work with Lifeology, is bringing art into science, because people can relate to art and they can see themselves often in art where they can't necessarily in science. And so how can we leverage art and visuals in order to make science more accessible to more people? Telling stories is really important for using social media. So that's the idea of, instead of just listing out, a bunch of facts, it's telling stories. That includes stories about yourself and your research. So what was the first thing that got you interested in a particular research question? Was this something you woke up in the middle of the night with this kind of thought about, I wonder, what if this? Or was there kind of an issue that you saw, a problem that you saw and you wondered how you could try to fix it, and you came up with a research question? So like, what was the beginning of a research project for you? And then as you went, like, what happened that maybe there was issues that you had to overcome? So a lot of people can't relate to science information, but they can relate to a human story of a scientist, struggling to maybe doing experiments and they were failing and the scientist was getting frustrated, and then they kind of realized they could look at the problem in a different way, and they came, to a different idea and then tested it, and then voila, like there was some kind of moment of insight. That's a very like classic story that I know science doesn't always work like that, but how can you tell a story about your science, maybe even yourself, and how you got into science, telling those human stories of struggles, of overcoming, of insight. Those are the things that people can relate to. And so especially with using social media, if you are able to tell stories, you're going to be able to engage people who aren't scientists. So I'll run through these. I want to have the animation still in there, but this is a great book I highly recommend called Wired for Story. It just goes through what a story is and how you actually tell one. It's kind of difficult to know like what a story is. A lot of people just think about, well, we need a plot, we need characters. But Lisa Cron does a job of talking about how story is actually like this story of personal internal change. So it's like, how did you go through something difficult, and what was your change of perspective, and how are you different now because of that experience? That's a very, very human experience, and so people can relate to that. So if you can couch your science or a research question or a clinical trial that you're running in a story about how you or others are having to face a challenge and trying to overcome it, that's going to engage more people because they can understand that story. And finally, don't do it all yourself. Find creators to work with, find collaborators. Especially when it comes to science communication, there's a lot of people out there whose jobs are to reach lay audiences with videos, TED Talks, art, infographics, animations, stories, movies. There's so many people doing that really well out there that if you can find them and engage them in your science communications, you're going to see a lot more impact than just trying to do it yourself. And my final tips is like, what if you just don't have time thinking about social media? It is a time sink. I'm not going to lie. So for scientists, you really need to think about how you can be strategic because this can take a lot of your time. So it's okay not to always keep up with your social media. You can take vacations from it. No one's going to miss it necessarily, which is kind of sad, but also it means that you can take breaks. And it's just going to, however consistent you are is going to probably impact how much following you get. It's perfectly fine when you're talking about blogging to only post when you're motivated to do so. So it can be, not very fun and then not very impactful to be like, well, it's Thursday, I need another blog post. I guess I'll just, blog about this random thing. Or I need to post a tweet today, so I'm just going to search around and find a funny cat thing to tweet. That's, it gets something out there, but it's not necessarily the most useful thing you could be spending your time doing. So post what you're passionate about, and try to make it a routine where maybe you incorporate it into your science, your process. So maybe on a day-to-day, something in the lab, you decide, well, every day I'm going to share, what I'm doing in the lab today and how that ultimately is helping me build to my ultimate goal of figuring out the answer to this research question. So if you can build it into your lab work, build it into a routine, and decide what you're going to do ahead of time, it's going to be easier to get that content out and for you to decide what you should be posting on a daily basis. And then you can also post as a lab group too, and focus on conversations that are useful to your career, and then also even the group of researchers that you're working with. That is it for the presentation. So now I want to open it up to questions. I have
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So there is a little time for questions. Please unmute yourself and then ask the question. If you want to put your video on, you're welcome to, but at least unmute yourself.
Actually, Dr. Jarreau, this is Megan Bronson. Thank you so much for your talk today. This was so full of knowledge and tips. I'm thrilled to start incorporating some of them. We actually have a few questions in the chat already. If we could start with those, and then we'll
Awesome.
Did you hear the question? If you did, could you repeat it? Because I didn't hear it.
Sure. So the question that was typed in chat first was, hi Paige, I find that I have to manage but it can easily suck up.
Can't hear the question.
I can, yeah, you're a little
Yeah.
bit distant in the background, but I can read it off. I see that now. So I find I have to manage my time efficiently in order to be productive. Do you have a strategic approach to using social media? I find that Twitter is my platform of choice, but it can easily suck up a lot of time.
That was my question.
Oh, okay. Well, we can cover that one. And then maybe we'll get to the other one. But yeah, as far as managing time efficiently, I struggle with this a lot. Personally, but also because I have to do this for my job. And so it's very, very easy for me to get sucked in to like a warp of social media kind of buzz. And then before you know, I've lost the reason why I went there in the first place. So I've heard people advise to just set a time limit, like set a timer for 15 minutes. And that's however long you engage in tweeting today. So maybe in the morning you set 15 minutes and you're like, you know, I'm going to try to follow a couple people, see if there's interesting conversation for me to engage with, create an update from my lab. And when that time is up, you know, sign off and say, okay, people, Twitter people, I'm going to see you tomorrow. I mean, it's a great way to just dedicate some time to it, but not let it get away from you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions?
There was one more. Let me see if I can read that one out for you, Dr. Jarreau. It says, great talk, Dr. Jarreau. Did you get permission from LSU regarding your account and your specific posts regarding your work with them? And is there a general rule of thumb for balancing personal and professional content on the same social media platform? That came from Dr. Tiffany Wesley.
Oh yeah, that is really, really good question. Really good. So I would say that this matters probably more for folks out there who are doing human research, animal research, healthcare research. That you're going to have to be really careful, and you probably there might be guidelines from your institution about what you can share, what you can't. So of course, it's really good to find out what those guidelines are before you run and amok of them. And so definitely just reaching out to your department head, someone who is in charge of kind of giving out communications guidelines. It would be great to talk to them and just make sure that you're not going to share anything that you shouldn't be. For LSU, for my work as a researcher, I mean, most academic researchers are sort of, they own their kind of research products, and they can share them, and that usually you have academic freedom to share. And so I usually, don't worry about sharing my own research, publications, stuff like that. But especially if you're sharing anything, pictures from the lab, if you're working for a PI, you're not the PI, pictures and processes, that stuff you might need to get your PI's permission to share those things. Yeah, and then as far as balancing personal and professional, I personally believe mixing those is good. When it comes to like the warmth and humanizing science. So I personally do share personal things as well as professional things like on my Twitter. I probably lean more towards professional and maybe a little bit of personal. But I think it's great to try to intermix those things if you're comfortable with it.
A couple more questions came in, Dr. Jarreau. You want me to read those or?
Sure.
Okay. Mandy Willig asks, is there a maximum number of social media platforms that you recommend not exceeding?
It's a good question. It depends on your time. So, I mean, even for me, when I am so many, so if I have my personal, let's say like the big ones, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, let's just say those in a blog. If I have 4 for my personal, and then I do 4 for my company, one of the company's products, then I do all 4 of those for another one of the company's products. I quickly have 20 plus social media platforms or accounts that I'm managing. It gets pretty crazy. So you just need to account for like that time that you're going to be investing. If you're not a full-time person doing this, you probably want to pick one or two. Maybe you have your personal account on Facebook and a lab blog, or, you know, personal Twitter and, you know, a lab Instagram. That will probably be plenty for you to maintain on a regular basis.
Great. Great. Nikki, did you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I wrote it down. I just wanted to ask about finding collaborators. Sometimes it's difficult to just put a call out on Twitter, because obviously, you know, I've got targets I need to meet, and one of the things for me is I want to ensure that whoever I'm working with has got the same ethical values as I do, especially doing research on social media. So have you got any tips around that? I'd love to find people across the pond, by the way.
Yeah. No, I mean, so classically, conferences are great for this, right? Like, you go to a conference, you start attending talks, you kind of hear people talk about their research, and then you can decide, oh, I think I should approach them about collaboration. So you can imagine there are social media channels that are essentially like virtual conferences. So just putting out a general call on Twitter might be difficult if you don't already have a following. But there, for example, there's a hashtag SciComm that a lot of science communicators use. If I tweet something and I put hashtag SciComm, it's almost like I'm making that tweet available to a virtual ongoing conference of science communicators. And so maybe they'll see it and they might respond, but that's just a general call. There are tons of groups on Facebook, groups on LinkedIn that are specific. So I created a Science of Science Communication Facebook group that people might join, and then they start to, okay, they can be a little bit more like that. There's a group there that's maybe a little bit more aligned with what they're doing, and so it might be easier to find collaborators as they go down like niche paths of online forums and that kind of thing. So some of that just takes time and finding, like Googling your research terms, you know, on LinkedIn and Facebook, and see if there's groups you can join. AAAS has like a member board, member community that you can post like questions into. So really it's kind of finding like, where are your people on social media? What hashtags are they using? What groups are they in? If you can figure that out and join those ones, then it's going to be a lot easier. It's just figuring that out in the first place. Yeah.
Thanks. Conferences is a tough one for me, actually, because I'm from a computer science department. So we don't tend to do this type of research. We're more kind of software engineering, agile type research. So I'm the only one looking at this, really.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. I mean, so you might end up finding that there's people outside of your field that would be good collaborators. Maybe they aren't computer scientists, but maybe they're, you know, science communication researchers or social science researchers in another field. And so finding where they live online, you know, could let you open yourself up to collaborators who aren't just computer scientists. So I find this easier now that I've grown up a social media following and I can like tweet and people just find me. It's really nice. But if you don't have that, you know, finding a collaborator, finding someone you know that is a prominent in your field and just asking them, like, can you retweet this for me? Do you know people who know people that I might collaborate with? That word of mouth is everything. And so that's a great place to start.
I've seen your following. I'm very impressed.
Okay, thanks. And it's really not huge, but it works really good because it's specific to who I'm trying to reach. So if I have, and that's another good point I didn't say, if you have 5,000 or 500 followers, but they are your people that you regularly want to communicate with, that's more valuable than having 100,000 just random followers.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you have time for one more, Dr.
One
Jarreau?
more. One last question.
Great,
It's a great question.
Yeah, Jamie Sell asks, is there a collaboration hub for Louisiana in general, or specifically LSU faculty?
I don't know of one offhand. I know there's science communication like groups and like that kind of thing in other states. Like North Carolina has like a Science Communicators of North Carolina group. But I don't know one of LSU specifically. So that'd be a good thing to start, maybe.
Great.
I'm sorry. Hi, this is actually Jay Muscle that asked the last question. I was wondering if I could reach out to you directly to help guide me in starting that hub for
Yeah,
in LSU.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, reach out. You can pretty much, my email is pretty readily available online, but you can tweet me. My DMs are open.
I started following you on Twitter when this all began. All right, great. Thank you. I'll DM you there.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Jarreau. That was very informative, and I want to thank so many people participating. It was wonderful. We had over 90 people, at least that I could count. And for the excellent questions, I'm glad under difficult circumstances, everybody took the time to make this LA CaTS program a tremendous success. Thank you very much.
Okay.